So came another tiny moment while they waited, laughing and talking just a trifle too much at their ease, a trifle too unaware, and then Miss Fulton, all in silver with a silver fillet, binding her pale blonde hair, came in smiling, her head a little on the one side, so tilted a little bit as I mentioned. Am I late? No, not at all, said Bertha. Come along. And she took her arm and they moved into the dining room. So from now on, where Miss Fulton actually entered into this house, into this room, you will probably notice the temperament and the behavior and the attributes of Bertha Young had certainly got changed. And these are all indicative regarding the kind of feeling she actually kept for Miss Fulton. Okay, and as I mentioned that this particular text has to be considered as a gendered text, the text that must have to be interpreted in terms of gender criticism. So therefore, such a kind of attribute, such a kind of behavior is actually linking towards the lesbianism, obviously. But as I mentioned earlier, as I mentioned my last class, that it is not the kind of a society where lesbianism or homosexuality was being taken in a positive way. So that's why these are all hinted, not overtly stated. Okay? So not at all, said Bertha. Come along. And she took her arm and they moved into the dining room. What was there in the touch of that cool arm? So that there is a difference, you see. You have to point out these lines. The lines, these are indicative enough about the feelings and emotions that actually Bertha Young possessed. What was there in the touch of that cool arm that could fan heart blazing, the fire of bliss? Now again, the bliss. The initial interpretation, the initial connotation of the term bliss has now got changed into something extra, something different. So it says, therefore, that it's a kind of an antithetical or maybe paradoxical statements have been made, because the arms are cool but blazing where? The heart. Okay, the fire of bliss that was actually up to the flame that is being pointed out here. What was there in the touch of that cool arm that could stirred blazing? The fire of bliss that Bertha didn't know what to do with. The fire was there, as has been pointed out. Miss Fulton did not take a look at her. But then she seldom did look at people directly. Her heavy eyelids, again, the minute descriptions, as you see. Here I must refer to one or two of Shakespearean sonnets. You also know that when you have gone through the Shakespearean sonnets, to be specific, it has been pointed out that the particular focus of sodomy, that is homosexuality, is always being posited with Shakespeare. And the diverse criticisms are always there. A group of critics are always thought that it is not a kind of a homosexuality that Shakespeare preached. Rather, it's a kind of a kind of sociological criticism that actually shows that Shakespeare was under the patronage of that Earl of Pembroke. And that's why he was describing Mr. W.H. in that way. But another criticism, the gender criticism, obviously, they actually pointed out that how can it be possible, okay, you are very much associated, you are very much, under the guidance of any man, then where is the necessity of representing, or where is the necessity of describing any man in its full detail? The physical beauty, the physical prowess, and physicality in general, okay? This is not simply the matter. When a male writer is describing in full detail a female personality, then it seems to be something heterosexual, the temperament of this man, that is in work. But when a male is describing in each and every kind of poem, some hints are there, some descriptions are there, some overt statements are there, deliberately, in a repetitive way, it recurs actually, you see, the kind of description that Shakespeare had made regarding Mr. W.H., the bodily functions and bodily beauty. These terms, these facets, these descriptions are always being considered as hinting towards the homosexuality, to be specific. Now, when you find that such a kind of description is being made in terms of the woman, a woman is describing a woman with its proper beauty and elegance, and I don't know that whether this can also be classified, this can also be associated with such kind of sodomy or something like that. So these are actually the temperaments. You see the description? Miss Fulton didn't look at her, but then she seldom did look at people directly. Her heavy eyelids lay upon her eyes, and the strange half smile came and went upon her lips, as though she lived by listening rather than seeing. But Bertha knew suddenly, as if the longest, most intimate look had passed between them, as if they had said to each other, "You too." What you too? You too what? So you too are feeling the same. What I am feeling for you. That is the line actually. So these are all indicative, as I mentioned. That Pearl Fulton, stirring and beautiful red soup in the grey plate, was feeling just what she was feeling. You see? The kind of similarity in the feeling and something like that. And the others, Face and Mug, Eddie, Harry, their spoons rising and falling, dabbing their lips with their napkins, crumbling bread, feeding or fiddling with the forks and glasses and talking. They are engaged in casual meaningless words, as I mentioned. The casual meaningless words and attributes and habits and eating and talking and drinking at the same time. But it's the Bharta Young who is actually thinking. They are actually being transported into another realm. Ironically, you will find certainly that at the end of this particular story, such a kind of feeling will not be reciprocated by the other woman. True, but the feeling of this lady that is being considered to be the bliss, at one point the bliss was associated with the fullness. At one point the bliss was associated with the motherly feelings. And now bliss is being associated with the kind of emotion, kind of feeling she was keeping for Miss Fulton. Okay, the person she loves at this moment. Okay, I met her at the Alpha show, the weirdest little person. She had not only cut off her hair, but she seemed to have taken a dreadfully good snip off her legs and arms and her neck and a poor little nose at all. Isn't she very Lee or lie with Michael Oates? So these are some words that have been taken. Lie, I didn't find any particular meaning of this particular term because it's not English. Isn't she very lie with Michael Oates? It might be kind of familiar or something like that. The man who wrote Love in False Teeth, he wants to write a play for me. So these are actually happening to be some informations that have been provided. These are not very much important regarding the structure of this particular story, regarding the main theme of this particular story, because these are some chit chats that have been taken by these persons. They are actually thinking in terms of theater. They're talking in terms of some dramaturgy and making of drama and performance. And that's why he wants to write a play for me, one act, one man, decides to commit suicide, gives all the reasons why he should and why he shouldn't. And just as he was made up his mind either to do it or not to do it, curtain. So this is the description of a kind of a play that was performed on stage. Okay, not half a bad idea. What is he going to call it? Stomach trouble? So this is the thing, that what kind of play was it? Is it a kind of a stomach trouble that actually incorporates into the particular story of this particular play? I think I've come across the same idea in a little French review, quite unknown in England. No, they didn't share it. They were dears, and she loved having them there. So you see, a kind of aloofness is being pointed out here. In the words, in the conversations that were continuing within the persons who were there, okay, the dramatist, and at the same time the persons who are engaged in such kind of a conversation, everything, the words, these are nothing to be associated with Bharta Young, because her feeling and temperament and the kind of thoughts that she is possessing at this moment. These are altogether different from the casual meaningless words that have been taken and that have been they were engaged in. So and distant aloofness is always being incorporated. No, they didn't share it. They were dears, and she loved having them there at a table and giving them delicious food and wine. তারা সবাই খুব কাছের আর কি, কিন্তু ওই ফিলিংটা কেউ শেয়ার করছে না, যে ফিলিংটা ও যেটা এই মুহূর্তে ফিল করছে। এখানে বলছে যে ultimately okay, and she loved having them there because they are the invited personalities and they are very much dears to her, and giving them, fed them with delicious food and wine. In fact, she longed to tell them how delightful they were and what a decorative group they made, how they seemed to set one another off, and how they reminded her of a play by Chekhov. The spelling is different. Harry was enjoying his dinner. It was part of his, well, not his nature exactly, and certainly not his pose, his something or other to talk about food and to glory in his shameless passion for the white flesh and lobster. That is an indication. Shameless passion for the white flesh of the lobster. That is actually commenting on, as you can see here, that is actually commenting on the temperament of this man, as you can see. The symbolic orientation of the white flesh of the lobster, it is indicating the temperament of Harry, who is nothing but a lascivious man, a lecherous man, who had a greed for women flesh. Here lobster has to be symbolically represented in terms of the female body, obviously. So such a kind of symbolic orientation, some sexual innuendos, some sexual indications have been made through symbols. So Harry was enjoying his dinner. It was part of his, well, not his nature exactly, and certainly not his pose, his something or other to talk about food and to glory in his shameless passion for the white flesh of the lobster and the green of pistachio ices, green and cold like the eyelids of Egyptian dancers. So again, you see that food and the female body has to be overlapped. Such a kind of description has been provided. The bodily beauty and the food. You see that food, this particular metaphor, this particular symbol has been incorporated in terms of representing the voluptuousness, the lechery, the physical greed, okay, and obviously the temperament of this man. When he looked up at her and said, "Bertha, this is a very admirable souffle," or softly something. It's like a cake actually. She almost could have wept with childlike pleasure because it's a public kind of admiration that she is taking and she has been given at this very moment. So that's why it seems to be that she almost could have wept with childlike pleasure. Oh, why did she feel so tender towards the whole world tonight? I have already mentioned you in my last class that when you are feeling something positive, it seems to be the whole world is in positive mood. Okay, so here she says that, oh, why did she feel so tender towards the whole world tonight? Everything was good, was right. All that happened seemed to fill again her brimming cup of bliss. Again, the container image has been incorporated. It's the brimming cup of bliss. That means bliss is, it's oozing out from the brimming cup. And still, in the back of her mind, there was a pear tree. It's symbolic. Regarding the symbol of garden, I have already mentioned, and the pear tree, the forbidden tree, and it's associated in terms of knowledge, the tree of knowledge, and such a kind of knowledge will certainly, it will destroy the bliss that she actually proposed to herself. And still in the back of her mind, there was the pear tree. It would be silver now in the light of the poor dear Eddie's moon, silver as Miss Fulton, who sat there turning a tangerine in her slender fingers, that were so pale a light seemed to come from them. So again, a minute detail, a minute description is there. Okay, to some extent, you see that a particular tangerine, it's a fruit, the citrus food that I have already mentioned in my previous class. It was in her slender fingers, and these are actually indicating towards some, might be, it might have some associations with the fruit of knowledge. Okay, so that would going to be provided to the lady, that is Bhatta Young. What she simply couldn't make out, what was miraculous, was how she should have guessed Miss Fulton's mood so exactly and so instantly. So these are all ironic, you see. বার্থা ভাবছে যে আমি কত সহজে ইনস্ট্যান্টলি আমি ওই লেডি দ্যাট ইজ মিস ফুলটন তার মাইন্ডটাকে রিড করতে পারি, কত সহজে তার মুডটাকে আমি ধরতে পারি, কত ইনস্ট্যান্টলি পারি, এক্স্যাক্টলি পারি. These are all ironic because we will find that she cannot actually know anything about the mood and temperament of this lady. তার নিজের মনে হচ্ছে আমি কত বুঝি তাকে আর কি. For she never doubted for a moment that she was right, and yet what had she to go on? Less than nothing. I believe this does happen very, very rarely between women. You see, the indication to the highest extent. You can underline them, and ultimately you can use them. Use this particular line. So I believe this does happen very, very rarely between women. Never been between men, thought Bharta. But while I am making the coffee in the drawing room, perhaps she will give a sign. What kind of sign is there? Give a sign, a nod, a kind of subscription. That means when she is subscribing to her emotions and feelings. What is that? What kind of sign it is? What she meant by that, she didn't know. And what would happen after that, she couldn't imagine. মানে যদি সত্যি সাইনটা দেয় তাহলে কি হবে সে জানে না. যদি সাইনটা দেয় তারপরে কি হবে সেটাকে সে ভাবতেও পারে না. While she thought like this, she saw herself talking and laughing. She had to talk because of her desire to laugh. I must laugh or die. But when she noticed Face's funny little habit of tucking somewhere down the front of her bodies means, it's kind of a waistcoat, as if she kept a tiny secret hoard of nuts there, Bharta had to dig her nails into her hands so as not to laugh too much. So actually she wants to laugh for any different reason, but when something laughable is going on, something ludicrous is going on in front of her, she had to check her, she had to control her, because it was not of showing courtesy enough when you laugh in the face of any other invited personalities. And come and see my new coffee machine, said Bharta. We only have a new coffee machine once a fortnight, said Harry. মানে 14 দিন হয়েছে হয়তো. Face took her arm. This time Miss Fulton bent her head and followed after. The fire had died down in the drawing room to a red flickering nest of baby phoenixes, said Face. So these are all indicating something extra. The nest of baby phoenix, that means from where the new birth will take place. So ultimately you will find that somehow a kind of transformation, a kind of new birth will be indicating. Okay, the new birth of a new self, probably of Bharta Young. হতেই পারে, কে বলতে পারে আর কি, যে পরবর্তীকালে যে যখন ওর টেম্পারামেন্টটা হয়তো চেঞ্জ হচ্ছে. Okay, I'm not talking about originality that she is feeling. I'm talking about the temperament. The fire had died down in the drawing room to a red flickering nest of baby phoenixes, said Face. Don't turn up the light for a moment. It's so lovely. And down she crouched by the fire again. She was always cold, without her little red flannel jacket, of course, thought Martha. At that moment, Miss Fulton gave the sign. What kind of sign? Have you a garden? Said the cool, sleepy voice. তোমার বাড়িতে গার্ডেন আছে কোনো? Is it a kind of a sign? What kind of sign? Is it indicating towards the sign for something extra? Sign for, I want to talk to you in private? Or maybe the garden is indicating towards the buyer of bliss. Okay, be a ear. So without a little red flannel jacket, of course, thought Bertha. At that moment, Miss Fulton gave the sign. Have you a garden? Said the cool, sleepy voice. This was so exquisite on her part that all Bertha could do was to obey. মানে ওকে কিছু বলেছে মানে ওকে obey করতে হবে, বুঝতে পেরেছো? She crossed the room, pulled the curtains apart, and opened those long windows. There she breathed. And the two women stood side by side, looking at the slender flowering tree. Although it was so still, it seemed like the flame of a candle, to stretch up, to point, to quiver in the bright air, to grow taller and taller as they gazed, almost to touch the rim of the round silver moon. So these are very famous lines actually. Two women stood side by side, looking at the slender flowering tree. তার দিকে তাকিয়ে আছে, pear tree দিকে. Although it was so still, it seemed to be that it's a constant tree that is standing there, like the flame of a candle. To stretch up to a point, it's the pinnacle of this particular tree, the topmost part of this tree, as if it has been stretched higher and higher, and as if it is coming out of the world and it is touching the moons. So if the tree is symbolically representing the bower of bliss, if the tree is indicating towards, the Garden of Eden, then ultimately it symbolizes their world. And they considered that they were completely free from the mundane, say, earthly touch, mundane earthly reach. And they can come together towards another realm, towards another place, which are completely, out of the reach of the ordinary obligatory rules and principles. That is the imagination. The imagination actually jaded them to that extent. And the two women stood side by side, looking at the slender flowering tree. Although it was so still, it seemed like the flame of a candle, to stretch up to point, to quiver in the bright air, to grow taller and taller as they gazed, almost to touch the rim of the round silver moon. The silver moon is obviously symbolic here. The moon is always being associated with such a kind of a fullness. How long did they stand there, both as it were, caught in that circle of unearthly light, understanding each other perfectly, creatures of another world, and wondering what they were to do in this one, with all this blissful treasure that burned in their bosoms and dropped in silver flowers from their hair and hands. কি করবে সেগুলো নিয়ে? Description, it's a very tough thing to describe. It is a very tough thing to, find words to describe your feeling, your temperament.